Hello, this is Rocky Marciano. When I was heavyweight champion of the world, they called me the Brockton Blockbuster. You find out why.
Welcome to the Rocky Marciano Archives, a channel dedicated to the memory of the immortal champion. Today's upload is a reading from Redemption. The Life of Rocky Marciano, Volume 1, 1923 through 1949, by archivist, researcher, and creator of this channel, John Cameron. In this piece, we delve deep into Rocky's first battle with Tiger Ted Lowry, one that still causes ripples of controversy today, some 75 years later. We hope you'll get something out of this. Theodore Adolphus Lowry could have been one of the greatest fighters in the history of boxing. He fought most everyone at heavyweight and light heavy in his time. Beat some, lost to others. He was a cutie, a spoiler, an unknown and very dangerous opponent. If ever there was a synonym for journeyman, it should have his biography under it, for he would fight at a week's notice, a day's and hours if he was in the right place. Yes, this man should have been one of the greatest of all time. If only he had come along a few decades later. Born on October 27, 1919, Lowry's early years were spent in depression. Hit New Haven, Connecticut, where local transportation was still provided mainly by horse and cart. At the age of 10, he lost his father, who doted on his youngest son. There were 4 other children. 3 years after the elder Lowry's parting, the family moved to Portland, Maine. Theodore, now more commonly known by the shortened version of Ted, grew up to be an athletic youth, trying his hand at most every sport from skiing to marbles. He was competitive in them all, especially basketball. Yet whenever he was quizzed as to what he wanted to be when he grew up, his immediate answer would be boxer. Strange, then, that he did not actually don a pair of gloves until he was 17, and only then at the goading of his small circle of friends who dared him to enter a touring amateur show that came to Portland. Ted entered, took part in 3 bouts, and won them all. For his efforts, he was awarded a medal and a robe. It was one of his greatest prizes since winning a basket of fruit as a child for heading a 60-meter foot race. The young Lowry's jump into professional boxing was meteoric. Within a short while of his amateur victories, he became a sparring partner for an unnamed middleweight who was in town to train for a crack at the middleweight championship of New England. "I gave him a good workout," recalled Lowry in his excellent autobiography, Gods in My Corner Publish America, 2006. In fact, the workout was so good that my trainer, Roy Brooks, and former heavyweight champion, Jack Sharkey, wanted to take me home to Massachusetts and train me and make a pro out of me. Before he could go, however, there was the prospect of asking his mother's permission. At the time, Ted was earning an honest living on the railroad, bringing home $18 a week, of which he would, akin to Marciano, give his mother all but 50 cents. Unlike Rocky, however, he would habitually ask for more, at which he would be rebuked. He didn't drink or smoke, so what did he need the money for anyway? "It took some convincing," added Lowry. "But they, Sharkey and Brooks, were able to convince my mother I would be able to send money home." Lowry's first professional encounter occurred on an evening in August 1939 in Portland, a 4-rounder that was billed as an exhibition against one Winfield Allen. The debutant gained the popular vote and thus notched up his first victory. Over the ensuing 3 years alone, he would build up the remarkable record of 68 bouts, winning 42, losing 22, and drawing 4. Along the way, he picked up the Maine State Light Heavyweight Championship. He also acquired a nickname, one that would stick with him for the rest of his life. Ted recalled how, at one of his earliest fights in New Bedford, "I didn't put up much of a fight that night. He won it easily." The young Portland-based professional continued to relate how, when he returned to his living quarters, that he shared with 5 other hopefuls, they showed their mutual disgust at his dire performance by placing his food plate upside down at their communal table. Stuck to the downside of the plate was a note cajoling him for his poor showing. Over the next week, none in the household would speak to Ted. He admitted later that he seriously considered returning home. "No one was talking to me anyway, so I didn't care." At the end of the quiet, uncomfortable week, Lowry had a fight booked, so he decided to just go in the ring blindly throwing punches until he got knocked out, then call it a day. So he followed his game plan, and at the bell for the first came out firing everything he had. "He never really got out of that corner," wrote Lowry. "I dropped him right there in the first round." When the winner returned to his quarters, everyone was full of congratulatory fervor. They had given the now conquering hero the silent treatment they claimed, in order to make him mad. If that was the real reason, then it worked. Over the ensuing weeks, Lowry kept up the tactic. It proved successful. So successful, in fact, that the local papers picked up on this all-attacking fighter and gave him a name that stuck. They called him Tiger. Yet the now newly proclaimed Tiger, Ted Lowry, almost came undone when he met someone who employed the same tactic as he. "I met up with a fighter who met me in my corner, and it was all I could do to get out of it. I was taken by surprise and did not look too good in that fight." As the humbled, seemingly declawed fighting animal left the ring, one of the customers yelled out, "You are the tamest tiger I have ever seen." In May of 1943, the tamest tiger would be caged for the next 3 years as he was called up to serve his country. His reminiscences of those years in the military make for remarkable reading and are covered in detail in his own work. Very briefly, Tiger Ted found himself part of an elite parachute regiment known as the Triple Nickels. His job was to put out fires caused by Japanese incendiary balloons that strayed into American territory. Promoted to sergeant, he found himself taking part in a 3-round exhibition with the then world heavyweight champion Joe Louis, who believed that Lowry had the potential to become a champion. It was, said Lowry, the pinnacle of his entire professional career. Released from duty, the now former, and citationed, Soldier returned immediately to the prize ring where, between late 1946 and his encounter with Marciano on the evening of Monday, October 10, 1949, the remarkable Lowry took part in no less than 41 contests against some of the top boxers in the light heavy and heavy class. This time, the results were a little less spectacular. He lost some 22 of those contests, 7 in a row before he met Rocky. Yet he was still dangerous. As if to prove it, he held heavyweight contender Lee Savold to a draw, plus effectively, according to those who witnessed the fight, beat future light heavyweight champ Archie Moore, only to see the verdict go against him. It is interesting to note that Archie, who had a penchant for fighting opponents multiple times, never faced him again. Yet his performances were becoming erratic, to say the least, for not long prior to facing Marciano, he had tackled Tommy Giorgio and lost. There were many times in the career of Tiger Ted Lowry when lack of preparation may have caused a subpar performance. Not through any real fault of his own, he was always in shape, but often such was the little notice he was given to fight that he would never get the chance to study an opponent, gauge the style, and figure it out. There were times, too, when verdicts may have been swayed in the favor of his opponent, a fighter on the rise who was more valuable than Lowry, especially as the 40s moved on towards their conclusion, pushing Ted inevitably towards his 30th year. The once young, literally hungry fighter never got his breaks, never got his big chance, whatever the reason, whether poor management or poor treatment. Tiger was swiftly becoming a filler, someone who was convenient, who could be relied upon to turn up at the drop of a hat. The only thing that was never a given was his performance. He could still pull one out of nowhere, he was still slick, he could still show up the inadequacies in any opponent. This was all especially true of the night he faced Marciano. Sam Silverman knew this. He knew it only too well, and it was this knowledge that brought Lowry to Providence this night. Silverman, who still ran the show at the Rhode Island Auditorium, explained, "I was becoming disgusted with Al Weil and wouldn't have minded getting rid of him. Weil wanted too much money. He was getting 25% of the gate, but the greedy guy wanted 30, and Weil was looking at getting Rocky soft fights now that he thought he had found something in Marciano. But I had to protect my club." Ostensibly, the astute promoter decided to bring in the Tiger to defeat Marciano and so put Weil in his place by ruining his dream. I thought Lowry was going to lick Rocky. Claims that Marciano's erstwhile manager was still protecting his fighter were countered by Charlie Goldman, however. What Weil has done for Rocky is sensational. From the beginning, he realized that he had a green fighter, slow to learn, but who was worth nursing along carefully. There were a lot of stories that the guys Rocky fought weren't trying and so forth, but none of those stories was right. No fighter who fought Marciano was held back. They were in there to knock him out if they could. Yet it was Sam himself who was mostly responsible for the caliber of opponents who faced the Brockton fighter in the first year of two of his career, especially in Providence. Rocky's fights were all legitimate, good hard fights. Marciano could have lost any number of times in his early fights, stated Silverman. To all intents and purposes, this was not just a bout that Rocky could have lost, but actually should have lost. Rocky had looked bad in the past. That was his way. He still had not developed into the tight-swarming fighter who would terrorize the heavyweight division later in his career. In fact, he would never become a textbook practitioner of the ancient art of self-defense. Yet he had always, and would always, find a way to win. Mostly it was through his own efforts. On this night, however, the way to victory was found, perhaps, through some force beyond himself. "I hate leaving the result to judges," Marciano was once quoted as saying. "I like to let my fists be the only judge. When others have control of the results, there is always the possibility of some skullduggery." Against Lowry, the feeling that there was some form of skullduggery afoot was definitely in the air. Reporter Michael J. Thomas, usually such an ardent supporter of Rocky, was amongst the majority of voices who felt that Marciano's victorious streak had been ended. There were strange developments and questions left unanswered as Rocky Marciano, undefeated young Brockton heavyweight, was awarded a unanimous decision over Tiger Ted Lowry of New Haven in their 10-rounder at the auditorium last night, wrote Thomas in the following days, early edition of the Providence Journal. He continued, "Marciano, in the first place, did not win the fight as this observer saw it. This reporter gave it to Lowry 6 rounds to 4. Remembered Lowry. Rocky Marciano was only 26 years old when I came face-to-face with him. He was an up-and-coming heavyweight. I was 29 years old with a fairly decent record myself. Although Marciano packed a devastating KO punch, I was not intimidated by him or his reputation. I had more experience than he did, and at the time, more knockouts. If anything, I think he underestimated me. But there was no fear in Rocky Marciano's eyes as we faced off that autumn night. He was cool, calm, and collected, and judging by the ovation he received, he was among friends." Lowry would continue with his recollections of that night. "I had the feeling they were handpicking his fights, bringing him along, so I was not intimidated by his record. I did not know until I was in the ring with him that he was all that they said he was. I will never forget that night. Outside, the air was crisp and cool. Inside, the temperature was rising. The bell rang, and Rocky and I moved towards each other. I did not face him, I gave him my side. I moved in on him, and he came at me swinging. Because of the position I was in, he was unable to hit me with his right or his left. Rocky stood in a semi-crouch and just kept swinging. He kept coming at me, relentlessly throwing punches. But I wasn't there. I was able to hit him at will. The erudite and literate Lowry regaled us with the first 4 rounds of the fight, stanzas that he won convincingly. As Thomas stated in his own article, Lowry came close to knocking out Marciano in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th rounds, when Lowry punched as though bent on making a kill. The wonder of it was that Marciano withstood the punishment. Lowry stung him with 2 terrific rights in the first. He rocked him with 2 vicious uppercuts in the second, either of which would have finished a less durable boxer. And in the fourth, Lowry had Marciano in such a bad way that it appeared it would be only a matter of time before he would complete his kill. Lowry again on his aggressive foe. I could tell by the expression on his face that he was befuddled and surprised. He had no defense against me, and he was having trouble trying to figure out my style. However, in the fifth, things changed, and changed dramatically. Suddenly, the tiger seemed to slow down, to go into a shell. It may have been that Lowry, 9-year ring veteran, tired. It may have been that he weakened from Marciano's unending body attack, but whatever the reason, there was an appreciable decline in his offensive operations in the second half of the fight, and it didn't look good to the crowd, nor to this observer. So reported Thomas again. In fact, so reticent did Ted seem at times that the referee, Ben Maculan, 3 times was forced to warn Lowry to open up, once in the 5th and twice in the 7th, even threatening him with disqualification if he failed do so. In defense, the man facing the swarming bull offered up his reasons for his seemingly reticent attitude to trade punches, or at least his inability to do so. I think the cornermen figured out my style somewhat because he came out fighting differently. Instead of rushing me, he moved around me. He slowed down and began to concentrate on what he was doing. He threw a right and then a left hook. I blocked his right hand and threw up my right hand by my ear to block the hook. That's when I found out he could punch. He hit me on my arm, and I thought he almost broke it. From now on, the former railroad worker would concentrate on preservation by fading away from his adversary's wallops, leaning back, turning slightly to negate their power, yet all the time picking off his opponent whenever he was able. It may have been this that cost him the fight, despite his belief that he won at least 2 of the remaining 6 rounds, a point agreed to by those present, save Marciano's corner and, more importantly, those judging the fight itself. Marciano was the much busier of the 2, reiterated the Providence reporter. He landed 3 punches to Lowry's 1 from the 5th round, on concentrating wholly on the body. His aggressiveness was probably what caught the eye of the 3 officials, but his thrusts lacked sting to be effective. Many should have been discounted altogether. The bout ended on an exciting note, with Marciano tossing a punch after the bell and Lowry, seemingly aroused, wanting to continue. The referee stepped in and stopped the overtime hostilities. Lowry came close to flattening Rocky just before the finish with a right hook. Marciano rocked but regained his balance. Thus saw Thomas, whose honest appraisal of the events that night showed the reality of a bout which was way too close for comfort for the unbeaten prospect who, no doubt, stood nervously sweating in the middle of the ring as he awaited the result. When announced, it would send the crowd of 3,695 into a frenzy of booing and cries of "Fix." The local Brockton paper, who saw their boy as a conclusive winner, commented on the boos of the crowd, but only in passing, and more due, it was claimed, to the fact that perhaps they had bet on Lowry to win at odds of 100 to 35 against. The beaten fighter was magnanimous in defeat. He was used by now to decisions being awarded against him. Yet as he made his way through the auditorium to his dressing room, he must have felt like the deserved winner as many in the disappointed crowd rallied to his side with pats on the back and voices filled with approval at his performance and equal disgust at the result. "I don't want to take anything away from Rocky," composed Lowry in his own recollections published in 2006. "He was a good fighter, well-conditioned and tough. I know that when I was in the ring with Rocky Marciano, I was in the ring with a fighter, not a boxer. And he was a good one. But, perhaps to Rocky's surprise, I was a good boxer and a smart fighter, too. No one can tell me differently. I know I beat Rocky Marciano in our first fight, and if he were alive today and wanted to set the record straight, he would tell you the same." So that was the tale of their first encounter. Tiger Ted Lowry would meet Marciano in the ring again, but that, dear listener, is the story for another day. Thank you for making it this far. We will see you down the road.
If you like this content, then hit the subscribe button. To really support this channel, consider joining for just over $1 a month and unlock ad-free members-only content. Every member will play a key part in revealing the real Rocky.
I just enjoyed combat. I just enjoyed the sport that I had learned so well. And I had practiced so much that when the bell rang, I did a job. I could concentrate on the opponent.
It was a great, great career for me. I'm proud and very happy to talk about it. Sometimes I wonder why I was such an aggressive man in the ring.